Because his 4 kids didn't want to come home, this old man decided to travel across the states, just to visit each of them and see for himself if they were truly happy. And every time he found one of them, he'd ask just one simple question.
You happy?
What do you mean?
You happy?
Yeah, of course I am.
This crazy plan goes back a few days. The night before Thanksgiving, Frank got up early and headed to the store. He not only bought a brand new grill, he also got some premium beef, all to prepare for the kids to come home and spend Thanksgiving with him. But after sitting by the phone for hours, waiting for news that his kids were on their way, all he got was a voicemail saying they were too busy to join the Thanksgiving dinner. As a father, Frank was overwhelmed with disappointment. Ever since his wife passed away 8 months ago, the kids hadn't come back home. Before she passed, she was the bridge between Frank and the kids. They told her everything, but now, things were different. His kids rarely even called. The loneliness hit hard, and he missed them more than ever. After thinking it over, Frank made a bold decision. He was going to travel across the whole country to visit his 4 beloved children. But to surprise them, he decided not to tell anyone. He wrote 4 letters to each of them, packed his things, made sure he had enough medication, and with one last look at the home he'd lived in for 70 years, he set off on his journey. But Frank wasn't sure how long he'd make it. Before retiring, he worked in a job that involved handling wire coatings, and years of hard labor left him with a job-related lung disease. When the doctor heard he planned to travel, he warned him to stay home and rest. A long trip could be dangerous for his health, but the longing to see his kids was too strong. So, he ignored the doctor's advice and hit the road. Along the way, his excitement about seeing his kids couldn't be contained. He even found himself bragging to fellow passengers about how amazing his children were. After a full day of traveling, Frank finally reached his first stop, New York, where his youngest son David lived. Frank always saw David as a successful artist. He couldn't wait to surprise him. But after waiting outside David's apartment building late into the night, his son still hadn't come home. Disappointed, Frank figured maybe David was out celebrating the holiday with friends and decided to grab a bite nearby. On his way, he passed a gallery with some of David's artwork on display. Looking at his son's paintings, memories started flooding back.
What are you gonna do when you grow up, huh?
I want to be a painter and do my pictures.
Not a painter. Christ, painters paint walls and dogs pee on walls. You're gonna be an artist. Artists paint pictures that change people's lives. So what are you gonna be?
An artist.
That's right, an artist. So you're gonna work hard?
Yes, Dad.
You're gonna make me proud?
I'm trying, Dad.
He then went to a 24-hour diner. On Thanksgiving, the place was quiet with just a few scattered customers. An elderly man with gray hair, perhaps out of loneliness, struck up a conversation with Frank. He told Frank that, despite having 3 sons and 6 grandkids, they were all too busy, so he had to spend the holiday alone. Looking at the old man, Frank couldn't help but imagine his own future. Alone, no one to talk to, finding comfort in the company of strangers. The next morning, Frank returned to his son David's apartment. But no matter how hard he knocked, there was no answer. He slid the letter he had written earlier through the door crack and left. What Frank didn't know was that behind that door was just an empty apartment. Frank's next stop was to visit his eldest daughter, Amy. In Frank's eyes, Amy was a successful executive living happily with her husband and son in a wealthy Chicago neighborhood. He rang the doorbell and to his surprise, he met his grandson Jack first. Jack was busy playing video games, and after a brief greeting, he told Frank that his mom was in the backyard. Walking through Amy's lavish house, Frank finally saw his daughter, the one he had been longing to see. Even though Amy was now a company executive, she would always be his little girl.
Amy!
Dad?
But Amy's behavior was odd. She seemed genuinely happy to see him, but there was a nervousness she couldn't hide. Her loving husband wasn't home at that moment either. He didn't come back until late at night. At the dinner table, Jack's rude attitude towards his father made Frank feel like something was definitely being hidden from him. He asked if he could stay a few more days, but Amy quickly made excuses, saying she was too busy with work. So, the next day, Frank set off for the next stop on his journey. Before he left, Frank asked if they could take a family photo, but Jack refused to stand next to his father. This only raised Frank's suspicions further. When Amy drove him to the train station, he finally asked the question that had been on his mind all along.
You happy?
What do you mean?
You happy?
Yeah, of course I am.
Even though Frank noticed the hesitation on Amy's face, he didn't press the issue and set off to visit his eldest son, Robert. In Frank's eyes, Robert was a successful conductor. So he went straight to the orchestra where Robert worked, even asking a passerby to take a picture of him with the orchestra's poster. But when he walked into the rehearsal, he was shocked to see that the young people on stage weren't his son. Robert was sitting at the very back playing the bass drum. Seeing his father, Robert looked flustered and guilty. After the rehearsal, Frank asked him why he wasn't the conductor. Robert stammered, admitting he had lied to his father and saying that he was happy with his current position. But to Frank, Robert was highly educated and talented. He felt his son's achievements should have been bigger by now. The tension was palpable, so they stepped out to the back door for some fresh air. Frank realized he might have been too hard on his son, so he complimented Robert on his drumming skills. Robert visibly relaxed, and the two of them found some common ground. Robert even introduced his father to his colleague. When it was time to say goodbye, Frank asked the same question he'd been holding in.
And you're happy?
Happy? Yeah. I get paid to bang a big loud drum all day. Of course I'm happy.
As they were about to shake hands, both of them suddenly realized they were family. They should hug instead. Just as Frank was about to leave, he couldn't help but turn back. No matter where Robert was in life, he would always be that smart, kind, and somewhat shy child in Frank's eyes. The last stop on his journey was to visit Rosie in Las Vegas. Frank had thought this would be another surprise visit, but Robert had already told his sister about his plans to visit. This old man kindly handed the homeless guy $10, thinking he'd at least get a thank you in return. But instead of being grateful, the guy's eyes locked onto the $100 bills inside the old man's wallet. When the old man didn't offer more, the homeless guy suddenly lunged at him, trying to grab it. But because he was weak from malnutrition, he ended up getting pushed to the ground. In the scuffle, the old man's pill bottle fell out. The homeless guy quickly got up and stood right next to it.
Please don't do anything. That's my medication.
But the homeless man ignored his desperate pleas. He stepped forward and crushed the pill bottle under his foot, then quickly turned and ran off. Frank didn't chase after him. He just quietly picked up what little powder was left from the shattered pills. At his age, Frank was already battling chronic pulmonary fibrosis. He couldn't fly or travel far and had to rely on daily medication just to stay alive. The toughest part? All 4 of his children lived in different cities. He had hoped to see them all on Thanksgiving, but one by one, they said they were too busy to come home. So Frank made a bold decision. He was going to travel across the states and surprise each of his kids. He didn't find his oldest son David when he went to New York, but he did manage to meet 2 of his other children. Now only one was left, his youngest daughter Rosie, who lived in Las Vegas. Rosie had already heard from her brother that their dad was on his way, so she went all out and rented a stretch limo to welcome him. Rosie's a successful dancer now, living in a fancy penthouse downtown. She even planned to take her dad to one of those famous rotating restaurants in the city. But before they could head out, a neighbor suddenly showed up with a kid in her arms, asking Rosie to babysit for a bit. She said she had an emergency. That bit turned into the whole day. They had no choice but to cancel the dinner plans, but Frank wasn't upset or disappointed. He happily played with the kid on the couch instead. For some reason, he felt an odd sense of closeness to this child. Later, he emptied his pockets of the crushed medicine, carefully picked out the bits of fabric, and swallowed all of it in one go. Then he happened to overhear a voicemail, and that's when he realized this apartment wasn't actually Rosie's. She had rented it just for his visit. Not wanting to burden her any further, Frank told Rosie he was out of meds and planned to head back home the next day. She didn't try too hard to convince him to stay. As they chatted about their mom, Frank finally asked the question he'd been holding in for years. Why had all the kids always opened up to their mother, but never really shared anything with him? Rosie explained that their mom had always been a great listener, while Frank tended to tell them what to do and was often too strict. Frank wanted to say it wasn't true, but Rosie just said,
I think David felt it the most.
Wanting to get home in time for his meds, Frank decided to fly back this time. He didn't ask Rosie if she was happy. He already knew she wouldn't tell him the truth. As she watched her father walk away, her heart felt like a tangled mess. The truth was, she wasn't some famous dancer. She was just a regular waitress at a restaurant. Up in the sky, as thunder rumbled through the clouds, Frank suddenly started to feel unwell. He got up to splash some water on his face in the bathroom, hoping it would help, but things only got worse. By the time a flight attendant found him, he was already about to pass out. In a haze, he found himself back in the backyard at home, sitting with his 4 kids. He asked why they had all lied to him. Even though they hadn't told him the truth about their lives, Frank had already seen through it all. He knew Amy and her husband had divorced. He knew Robert's orchestra wasn't actually going on a European tour. As for Rosie's neighbor, that was actually her partner. The baby? It was Rosie's own child. And David? Where was David? Where would he have to go to find him? Suddenly, a loud crack of thunder broke the silence. Rain poured from the sky, and the kids quickly packed up and ran back into the house. Frank stayed behind, looking up at the sky, trying to understand how things ended up this way. Why had they all been lying to him? When Frank opened his eyes again, he was in a hospital bed. All the kids were there except David, and that absence gave Frank a sinking feeling. Under Frank's questioning, they finally revealed the truth. Over the years, David had been struggling. He wasn't a successful artist, and he felt like he hadn't lived up to his father's expectations. His mother's passing had been an even greater blow to him. Eventually, he passed away in Mexico. Although Frank had already suspected something had happened to David, hearing the heavy news still left him unable to accept it.
No, not my son. That's not my son. No.
In a half-conscious state, Frank recalled the conversation he had once had with David, where he asked him to become an artist. At the same time, the young David appeared by his bedside. David said he had always been thinking about what job to pursue when he grew up. This time, Frank didn't impose his own ideas on his son. Instead, he told him that no matter what he chose to do, he would be proud of him. David nodded thoughtfully.
I told Mom I wouldn't be long.
Give him my love.
I will. I'll see you, Dad.
David.
Hmm?
I'm sorry.
It's not your fault, Dad.
David?
David?
After some time, Frank recovered and was discharged from the hospital. He returned to his quiet, empty home. The letter he had sent to David was returned to him. In the letter, he had invited the kids to come home for Christmas. He had also included a photo, a picture of the children when they were young, celebrating Christmas with their mother. But David would never get to see any of it. Frank went to visit his wife's grave. He said it had been a long journey. He wasn't sure what he had learned from it, but if he could do it all over again, he wouldn't be so strict with the kids. As long as they were happy, that would be enough for him. A few days later, Frank returned to New York. He wanted to buy the painting that had once been displayed in the shop window, the one by David. But unfortunately, it had already been sold. Feeling disappointed, Frank turned to leave, but the shop assistant suddenly ran out after him. She had just realized he was David's father. She said David used to say that if it weren't for his father, he might never have become an artist. She then led Frank to the back room, where one of David's unfinished paintings was being stored. She told him that David never cared about what was popular. His work always had its own unique style. When Frank saw the unfinished painting, his eyes filled with tears. It showed rows of telephone poles, a quiet tribute to his father's job making telephone cables. David had always known what his father had done for them, and he had truly appreciated it. As the snow covered the ground, Frank returned to the supermarket. It was Christmas Day. He bought the best steak again and picked out a beautiful Christmas tree. This time, all of his children came home to spend Christmas with him. They decorated the house together, cooked together, and during dinner, as Frank looked around at his happy, smiling family, he felt a wave of emotion. He had always hoped his children would be successful, but now he realized that as long as they were happy, that was enough. There was no need to push them so hard. All he wanted at that moment was to say one thing to his late wife.
Everybody's fine.
With that, the movie ends. Everybody's Fine is one of De Niro's underrated works. Some people might find it a bit too sentimental, but I really appreciate the theme of how family members can grow distant simply because they don't know how to talk openly with each other. Feel free to share your thoughts about the movie in the comments. See you in the next movie.